My hands are trembling as I write this. I'm hiding in my towel closet. I called the cops, but I don't think they'll be here in time. I mean, who takes calls on Christmas Eve seriously? They probably think I'm some teenager prank, calling them since I have nothing better to do than take away time from someone's Christmas. Who would believe what I'm about to say anyway? Let me back things up and set the scene for you. I live alone, 2 states away from my family. I feel terrible for not being able to visit them this year. I've been having financial struggles as of recent. Paying off student loans is no joke. This is the first time I've been able to live on my own. I'm renting a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. All that's around is a convenience store and a bar. The place is nice and the rent is cheap. So who am I to complain? 1 bed, 1 bath, and a cramped kitchen that's right behind the living room. The living room has a nice fireplace too. It keeps the house warm through the night. So now that you've got the picture, I need to share my experience no matter how few people see it. I didn't have big plans for the holidays. Stay at home, watch some TV, and eat a frozen pizza if I was lucky. No big fancy dinner, no visitors, just an average night. That's just what happened. I kicked back on the couch with pizza in hand and watched Christmas movies until my eyes grew heavy. I was awakened by a knock at my door at around 11:45. It's dark and snowy out, per usual this time of year. I don't get visitors, nor could I see who it was, so I looked out of the small window in the living room. Frost cloaked the glass, making it a challenge to see who was waiting for my answer. I could make out a human-like figure. My gut was telling me to stay the hell away from what was at my door before I even got a chance to move. The snow was falling so heavily that it was hard to see anything beyond 6 feet of my house. I trusted my gut, though, and moved to my room. I began to think I was a bad person for leaving whoever was out there in that icy mess. Just as the thought entered my mind, the knocking grew louder. I covered my ears in response to the noise beyond my door. I faced away and it only got worse. Bang, bang, bang. I was right to trust my gut. Bang, bang, bang. I shouldn't open the door. Bang, bang, bang. I can't let this go on. I exhaled deeply and threw my legs over the bed and reluctantly shuffled over to my door. I twisted the knob and peeked outside. The cold weather nipped at my face as a reply. Hello? I peered through the crack. Hi, the person started. I began to make out facial characteristics and realized it was a young woman. My car broke down, and this seemed like a good place to seek shelter. That was a red flag to me. There's a convenience store and a bar within a mile of each other. Why show up to a random house for help? Now, I consider myself a nice guy, but the holidays don't make me a giving person. I don't like my sleep being interrupted either. I started. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her behavior was off, to say the least. She was glancing over her shoulder, as if she could see anything through the darkness and snow. I can give you a number for a towing company. There should be an inn, at least a few miles from here. The towing company can take you. She didn't seem satisfied. Are you sure? She inquired. It's awfully cold out here, and I don't know how long it will take them to get here. She began to look more paranoid. Her eyes darted from side to side, up and down. It was really freaking me out. Listen, my house is a wreck, and it's the middle of the night. I'm sorry. I know it's the holidays, but I have a thing about letting strangers into my house. I immediately regretted saying those words. Her fear turned to anger. At this point, she became hysterical. She kicked, punched, and beat my door, trying to force herself in. Her polite words were now screams. Let me in. Let me in. The Jane Doe at my door pounded harder and harder. It seemed like my door was about to break. What the hell are you supposed to do in this situation? So, in the spur of the moment, I just locked the door. The knob rattled violently, then stopped abruptly. I picked up my phone and alerted authorities that there was a manic woman outside of my house. At this point, I figured she had given up and left. I sat down in front of the TV and tried to enjoy the rest of the night. I pondered why she was so upset. No family, trauma, none of my theories added up. Just as my thinking had concluded and I began to relax, I heard a faint sound. A sound that was so quiet but seemed so loud. It was the shuffling of snow outside of my window. I pulled my blinds back and peeked outside. The dim light from the street lamps shone onto my white lawn. The woman was making a circle in the snow. I squinted, trying not to reveal my presence. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness outside. It was now 1 a.m. There were symbols I couldn't recognize and a large pentagram in the center. When she finished her artwork, she looked right at me. She was staring into my soul. Her gaze sent chills down my spine. Her mouth opened at inhuman angles. Just then, a scream was released. I fell back into the couch. What the fuck do I do? I called the cops for a second time. Writing this, I'll be censoring my address for my own security. Here's how that phone call went. Address. I need police. Please come quick. Sir, we already have the sheriff and backup on their way. They should be there within the hour. Lock your doors. I heard a click on the other end. Well, what am I supposed to do now? I'm alone in this house, which seems much more ominous than the night before. There's some psycho lady standing in my yard in the middle of the night. To top it off, the cops that should be arresting this woman are probably out for drinks. I let out an audible sigh and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. This was not what I thought of as an ideal Christmas. I figured I might as well freshen up and get ready for bed. Any sliver of hope left in me was gone. I picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the bathroom. I didn't want to risk her seeing me, so I just used the dim flashlight on my phone. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my face. I thought that would make me feel better, more alert. I was wrong. Once I had finished, I heard a knock at the door, followed by a scream. It was deep, unlike the shrieks previously heard from the girl. Something in me clicked. I mustered the strength to peek outside. There were blue and red lights flashing, signaling help had arrived. But something was wrong. The lights from the car further illuminated my lawn. There were 2 mangled bodies left inside of what I can only describe as the altar. Remnants of black uniforms informed me of who they were, police. Another guttural howl was heard, this time only a few feet away from my window. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to hide. That brings me to the now. I'm in my towel closet. There are 2 dead bodies in the snow and something outside of my house. Something, not human. I don't know when she, or it, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, will get inside, but my gut is saying that she will. I couldn't have picked a worse spot to hide. I feel like the idiot friend in a horror movie that gets plucked off first. Please, if you're listening this, protect yourself this holiday season. Don't let it know you're there. Don't be like me. Please save yourself and your family. I just heard something come down the chimney, and it's not Santa. She's inside. My 6-year-old son, Jeff, sat on the bed next to me thinking. I was typing up my son's Christmas list on my laptop, preparing to email it to Santa. Of course, I was merely going to send it to myself. I didn't trust any of those email addresses claimed to be run by the real Santa, and I wanted to play it safe just in case some creep was trying to use parents' email addresses to stalk their children. Is that it? I asked Jeff. He was always a low-maintenance child and never demanded a whole lot. Jeff nodded. That's all I can think of, he said. I smiled and sent the email before closing my laptop. Now we just need to wait until Christmas morning, I told Jeff. He smiled as he jumped off my bed and ran off to play with his toys. The next morning, while Jeff was at school, I checked my email and was surprised to see a message titled "Your Son's Christmas List" from an address I didn't recognize. I opened it up. Hi, Christina. I saw your son's Christmas list, and there's no need to buy those Hot Wheels or that stuffed iguana yourself like with last year's gifts. I can send it right to you, and you can give it to him on Christmas. I can also confirm Jeff has been a good boy this year, one of the best I've seen. Signed, Santa Claus. I was confused. Who was this? How did they know my name or email? How did they know my son's name for that matter, or what he wanted? I told myself it was just one of my friends from work playing along. Yeah, that was it. Yesterday I had chatted with some of my friends over texting about what our kids wanted for Christmas, so one of them had probably just made a new account to add to the fun. I deleted the email and went back my usual business. Shortly after Christmas break began, I sent Jeff over to a friend's house while I went to the store and bought the toys he had asked for, along with some wrapping paper. After heading home, I checked my email again and noticed a new message from the same mysterious address that had emailed me last time. Hi, Christina. I saw you went out and bought the gifts that I said I'd bring myself. That's okay. I'll bring my own surprise gift for Jeff instead. See, I've been a little short on elves this season, and I've been looking for new recruits to help me make toys. Jeff is such a good little boy. He'll make a perfect elf. Hope you don't mind me taking him up to the North Pole on Christmas Day. I promise I'll bring him down every now and then to visit. Signed, Santa Claus. My heart sank. I hadn't told any of my work friends that I had bought the gifts yet. Something weird was definitely going on. I decided to write a response back, angrily demanding whoever this person was to tell me who they were, why they were stalking me and my son, and informing him to stay the fuck away from us, or I would call the police. A few days went by with no response. I felt relieved, thinking the guy had finally got the memo and decided to leave us alone, and I completely forgot about it until Christmas Day. While Jeff was asleep during the night of the 24th, I wrapped up the presents and put them under the tree, as per tradition. The next morning, while I was still in bed, I expected to hear Jeff excitedly shouting from the living room that Santa came. I was surprised to hear absolutely nothing, not a single peep. I checked the clock. It was 8 in the morning. Strange. I usually expect Jeff to be up earlier than that, especially since it was the happiest time of year for a child. A few minutes passed, and I quickly became concerned. I decided to go downstairs to Jeff's room and check up on him to see if he was okay. I knocked on his door before cautiously peeking in. He was laying in his bed, the blanket pulled up to his head, and his back facing me. "Jeff?" I asked. He replied with a weird, grunting sound. Was he sick? I walked over to him and rubbed his head. "Jeff, get up." Santa came. I stopped when I felt a pair of weird bumps on his head, buried underneath his hair. Jeff then turned his head to me, and I jumped in shock. His ears were pointed and covered in hair. His face was stretched out like a dog's muzzle. He grunted again and stuck one arm out from under the blankets. Instead of a hand on the end, there was a furry brown hoof, like that of a goat. My face turned pale as I stared in shock, unable to speak or move upon seeing my son's current state. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. I ran upstairs, desperately hoping it was one of my friends from work who could help. I looked through the peephole and noticed an unfamiliar figure standing at the door. He was overweight, with a red jacket and a long white beard. Thankfully, I had locked the door, so the man couldn't come in even if he wanted to. I then remembered the weird emails from this month, so I pulled out my phone and opened up my web browser. There was an email from last night, sent from the mysterious address. I opened it up, and what I saw nearly made me faint. I just stood there reading the message over and over again, trying to process everything as the man at the door continued to knock. "Hi, Christina. Since you turned down my request to make Jeff into one of my elves, I decided Jeff would make a good reindeer instead. My current reindeer are getting too old to pull the sleigh, and I need just one more kid to complete my new team. I'll be coming over tomorrow morning to pick him up. Signed, Santa Claus." 3 years before I was born, my mother and father had their first child. He lived for mere 7 minutes before his breathing stopped and he died. I have never inquired as to what caused him to stop breathing. A little over a year after this terrible incident, my parents had a daughter, and then 2 years after her, I was born. Naturally, my parents had no reason to tell me about my older brother when I was younger, and even as we all got older, the story was never told to me, presumably because it was too painful to recall. If the following events had never occurred, I might have never found out about him at all. In early December, during my junior year of high school, the family gathered around the Christmas tree to load it up with the ornaments we had gathered over the years. Our family had continued to grow after my birth. My parents had added another son and daughter. My parents had bought each of us an ornament each year. So after adding those to the stockpile that they had owned before we were born, we always had one hell of a time fitting all of the ornaments onto the tree. This year was no different. But we pushed and we slid and shoved and eventually found some green for all of them. In addition to the ornaments, we had a fairly nice manger set that was placed underneath the tree. It had the whole damn birth party, and of course contained a wooden crib in which the figurine of baby Jesus lay. After my siblings and I had set this up, we stood for a minute or two and admired our work, and then we each went our separate ways and on with life. A day after setting the tree up, I walked into the living room to find one of my ornaments on the ground. It was the first ornament that had been given to me and had firstborn son etched into its face. The bright bronze had become cloudy over the years, but the ornament was sentimental, so it always managed to find a prominent place on the tree. I found the spot I thought it had fallen from and rehung it before walking through the room. I passed through the room the next day to find the ornament again on the ground, and again I hung it up. I tried to hang it in a different spot this time, assuming the weight had allowed it to slide from a thin branch, but to no avail as it was on the ground the following day as well. I placed it back on the tree and was not too surprised when I came in the next day to find the ornament missing from the spot. What did surprise me, however, was that the ornament was not on the ground, but was instead sitting on the coffee table, a few feet away. I assumed my mother was having the same problem with the ornament and had just given up and placed it on the table, so I stopped in the kitchen to ask her about it. She was doing the dishes, and when I asked, she turned around and with a funny look on her face and told me that she too had been picking the ornament up each time she walked into the room. For the next few days, each time I walked into the room, I continued to find the ornament off of the tree. But now the location had changed. It was no longer lying in random spots on the floor or on the table like it had been before. Each time I walked in the room now, the ornament was inside of the roofed manager, leaning against the crib with the Jesus figure. I was young, and I'm sure that didn't help prevent me from thinking that things were adding up a little strangely. It seems really stupid now, but I grew up in a semi-religious family, and something about finding my firstborn son ornament leaning against Jesus every day appeared to me to be a harbinger of something evil that would cometh my way. The non-surprising thing is, nothing ever happened to me. Obvious, I suppose. But my dad, my no-nonsense, get out of my face with your stupid paranormal bullshit. I'm just gonna go into this scary dark room to get the toolbox. Mysterious moaning be damned. Had something happened to him? He tended to work in his basement office until the wee hours of the morning. Most of that time was actually filled with him sleeping in his chair, as evidenced by him springing up and feigning awareness every time I would go into the basement late at night. In the early hours of the morning of December 23rd, he was, as usual, down in the basement. Around 2 a.m., he was awakened by footsteps crossing down the first-floor hallway above his head. He decided he would come up and see who was up, and then continue upstairs to bed. As he came up the basement stairs, he could hear the person walking through the kitchen on the other side of the door, but when he opened it, the person had just crossed into the dining room. He followed the steps through the kitchen and around the bend, but again was too late. The footsteps had beat him around the turn and into the living room. He rounded the corner and was surprised to see an empty room and no longer hear the footsteps. From the other room, they had appeared to stop at the Christmas tree. As he stood there, scanning the space and trying to figure out what he had heard, he noticed an object lying on the ground towards the middle of the room. As he walked up to it and started bending over, he realized there were actually two objects lying in the middle of the living room floor. Baby Jesus and the firstborn son ornament that was lying against his side. The next day, My dad told all of us the story at breakfast. My parents must have known that I was feeling a little unsettled from it all, so they decided to finally tell me what they had kept a secret for 16 years. They told me about their happiness at getting pregnant, the 9 long and exciting months my mom had carried my brother, and their feeling of complete desolation and absolute loss when he died. They told me how it still hurt, especially around the holidays. At first I assumed this was because everyone becomes sentimental around the holidays. Then they told me the real reason my brother had been born and died on December 23rd at 2 a.m. Last night had been the 20th anniversary of his death,